Okay.
First, let me say it was my idea. We were invited to speak separately, and it was my idea for us to speak together. So because of that, I'm going to sort of do the setup and make the opening remarks. My husband, Carroll Dunham, and I have been together since 1977, which by my calculations makes us now part of an alternative lifestyle, I think. We met when we were young artists in New York. We were friends for a long time before we became a couple. And although we consider ourselves very separate, we've worked not side by side, but in close proximity in many different places, many different places, many different times in our lives, ups and downs, but we have been working near each other. We've paired 11 images of each of us, and we decided that we would put images together and just kind of spontaneously see what came of that pairing. And
they're chronologically linked.
Chronologically linked. So just to start, we're starting in 1977, and the first time that Tip came to my studio to see my work, I showed him images from the black and white series. So he came to my studio to see my work before I went to his studio to see his work, but we did start our relationship and our friendship as two artists who were interested in finding out what each other, what we were up to. And New York was a pretty, in the 70s, conceptual art was at the forefront. The generation, my generation that was using photography was just starting to coalesce. Everyone was working privately, and these photographs were before I understood that I had a peer group. So when I did show Tip my work for the first time, didn't quite know what I was doing. I was very self-conscious, but I felt very certain that photography was where it was at. So I was a little bit skeptical of the fact that he was painting and drawing. So now
Yeah, we were part of the same scene, I suppose, but coming to it from slightly different directions, and both doing work that presupposed a lot of interest in recent art developments and a fair amount of knowledge about it. But as Laurie said, she had found photography to be her tool, and she and the people that she was talking to tended to be fairly, if not hostile, at least doubtful about the possibility of painting being interesting. And I had made an almost perverse decision, executive decision on my own, that I wanted to be the guy that made abstract painting. So I'm fairly sure when we met that I liked Laurie's work more than she liked my work.
That is correct.
And you can say, I mean, these are things we were both making in the late 70s. That painting is distorted. It's a very small painting on a panel. But I was trying to find a way to bring, I suppose, what you would call emotions back into a very reductive way of thinking about painting and drawing. And Laurie was working on something completely different. So for quite a while, our being involved with one another, we had a lot of conversations about art, and we went to a lot of art events together and explored the art world socially together. But our theoretical positions, or our philosophical dispositions were fairly different.
At the point that we met, it was one of those periods that we now know come and go, but essentially painting was dead. It had died again. And the people that I knew, my peers, my friends, were really aware of that. And Tip I knew that he had worked for both Dorothea Rockburn and Mel Bachner, and was very involved with a number of conceptual and process artists. So I was really trying to understand what he was up to in terms of making painting. So what I would tell myself was that, well, he's making painting, but he's not really a painter. It's sort of more, it's more ironic. It's more conceptual. But that was absolutely not true. I just needed to find a way to make sense out of the fact that he wasn't a photo-based or process-based or video or film or fill in the blank. I wanted him to almost be anything but a painter.
And I think one of the things that's a little strange about us trying to speak to you all simultaneously is that we've, as Laurie said, we've always worked closely because we share a home and we've had studios in the same buildings many different times and raised children together and all, but our kind of launch vectors were quite different. And it's been surprising to us, and you'll see a bit of this as we go on, the way that the influences back and forth of work, because they're really not, they're not obvious probably to anyone outside of our little world. So we're into around 1981 now.
No, my photograph is from 1979.
We're 80-ish.
And one thing that's very significant, the reason that I chose that photograph is that my first show was at Artist Space in 1979, and those pictures were dollhouse interiors in color, women in bathrooms and kitchens. They were very tiny. I printed them myself. And right after that show, I was offered a show at PS1, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do, I've always tried to be inclusive and sort of have either a male point of view or male imagery in my photographs. So I decided that the equivalent of the 1950s housewife was the cowboy that was on television. So these figures that I used belonged to Tip and his brother. They played with them when they were kids. And he gave me a set of these things that he called the big figures. So he gave me my toys, and we went to his parents' place in Connecticut, and that's where I shot those pictures. So just to point out that the ways that we influence each other or sort of penetrate each other's work have to do with the things we give each other or the opportunities we offer to each other. And before you speak about your painting, when we put these two up, I thought it was really interesting to even see that the palettes connected in a way. I mean, that's random, but I sort of like that.
Well, again, the photographs look more like what they really are in this kind of a presentation than the paintings do. That painting, again, is not very large. The time I was still struggling with my idea that abstract art was I really never doubted that abstract art was the main thing of interest in late 20th century aesthetics. And I suppose being in close proximity to Laurie's work and Laurie's ideas started to erode that position of mine a bit, but it didn't become apparent for quite some time, and that certainly wasn't the only thing that eroded it. A lot of it was just disconnects in my own thinking and my own character, I suppose. But I was trying to find ways to bring things that felt more like, I always say, more like what it's like to have a body, to be a physical entity in the world. Things that didn't seem like they were very much of a part of the kind of abstraction I was interested in at that time. I mean, the 1980 is a kind of hinge moment for our generation. So a year or two on either side of that, there was a lot going on that I don't think Laurie or I really knew about. I didn't know that there was a whole generation of people my age who had decided to make paintings. This was 3 or 4 years before I had ever heard the name Julian Schnabel or David Sally or any. All of these are peers of mine, but I didn't know about them. I was in my own little place trying to figure it out. and mostly responding